A man in his early 70s opens an envelope from Medicare 2 years after a perfectly reasonable withdrawal, and his premium has jumped by close to $1,000 a year per person for him and his wife both. He doesn't remember making a risky decision. He remembers paying for a new roof. That single withdrawal crossed an income line by less than $1,000, and the government doesn't phase you in gently when you cross it. It charges you the full higher tier instantly for both of you every year until your income drops back down. That's not a hypothetical. It's how Medicare's income-related surcharge, IRMAA, actually works, and it's one of 3 landmines hiding behind a single bad decision. Which account you pulled money from first. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. The exact same retirement account, the exact same dollar amount, pulled in a different order, can be worth nearly $500,000 more or less over the course of your retirement. Same savings, same investments, different sequence, different outcome entirely. My name is Uncle Investor, and I spend my time breaking down exactly how money decisions like this play out over 20, 30 years, not just this tax season. If you want to actually understand the mechanics behind your own retirement income instead of guessing, stay with me, because today we're going deep on one of the most expensive mistakes in retirement planning, and it's not a bad investment. It's pulling money from the wrong account at the wrong time. When you're working, money shows up. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, a deposit hits your account, and you don't think much about where it came from. Retirement breaks that rhythm completely. The paycheck stops, but your bills won't. Some of that gap gets filled automatically. Maybe you have Social Security, maybe a pension. But for almost everyone, there's a difference between what comes in automatically and what you actually need to live on. That difference is what I call the gap, and closing the gap is the single most important financial decision you'll make every single year of retirement. Let's make this concrete. Say you need $10,000 a month to live the life you want. Social Security gives you $4,000. That's 40% covered. The other $6,000 a month, $72,000 a year, has to come from somewhere. That's your gap. And the account you pull that $72,000 from determines how much of it the government keeps. This is where almost every retiree, and frankly, almost every retirement video on this topic, gets a little too comfortable. They say, just take a little from each account, spread it out evenly. It feels fair, it feels balanced, and it is, without question, one of the most expensive habits in retirement. We'll come back to exactly why in a few minutes with real numbers. Before we talk about order, you need to understand what you're actually working with, because each of these buckets plays by completely different rules. Bucket 1, taxable accounts. Brokerage accounts, joint investment accounts. You bought stock with after-tax money. It grew. And when you sell, you owe long-term capital gains tax only on the growth, not the whole amount. The IRS publishes this directly in its own tax guidance. For 2025, married couples filing jointly pay 0% federal tax on long-term capital gains as long as their total taxable income stays at or under $96,700. Not a low rate, 0. That threshold moves up slightly almost every year for inflation, which means this window quietly gets a little wider each year, and almost nobody adjusts their withdrawal plan to take advantage of it. And when this money eventually passes to your kids, they get what's called a stepped-up basis, meaning the gain essentially resets, and in many cases, they inherit it completely tax-free. Bucket 2, tax-deferred accounts, traditional IRA, 401k, 403b. You got a tax deduction going in, which felt great at the time, but every single dollar that comes out in retirement is taxed exactly like a paycheck, as ordinary income. There's no special rate here, none. And when this money passes to your heirs, they pay ordinary income tax on it too. This bucket is generous on the way in and expensive on the way out. Bucket 3, tax-free accounts. Roth IRA, Roth 401k. You got no deduction going in, but if you've met the age and 5-year holding requirements, every dollar that comes out, growth included, comes out completely tax-free. It also doesn't count toward 2 calculations we're about to discuss that quietly cost retirees thousands of dollars a year. So here's the real question this video answers. It's not which account has the most money in it. It's which dollar pulled from which bucket does the least damage to your overall tax picture. That's a completely different question, and almost nobody frames it that way. Stay with me, because this next part is where most retirement plans quietly fall apart. Before you can choose an order, you need to know where the landmines are buried, because withdrawal order isn't really about avoiding taxes on the withdrawal itself. It's about avoiding the chain reaction that one withdrawal can set off. Landmine 1, the Social Security tax torpedo. Depending on what's called, your combined income, your adjusted gross income, plus tax-free interest, plus half your Social Security benefit, up to 85% of your Social Security can become taxable. For married couples filing jointly, under $32,000 of combined income, none of it is taxed. Between $32,000 and $44,000, up to half becomes taxable. Above $44,000, up to 85% becomes taxable. And here's the trap. Those thresholds have barely moved since the 1980s. So every year, more ordinary retirees get pulled into this without ever earning what most of us would consider a high income. A single extra $2,000 withdrawal from a tax-deferred account can suddenly make a much bigger chunk of your Social Security taxable. It can feel like your tax rate doubled on that one decision alone. In short, cross that line by $1, you pay more tax on income you already earned. Landmine 2, Medicare IRMAA. This one is sneaky because it doesn't show up immediately. For 2025, the threshold sits at $106,000 for a single filer and $212,000 for a married couple, based on income from 2 years earlier. Cross that line, even by $1, and you don't get eased into the next tier. You pay the entire higher tier immediately, which can run close to $1,000 more per year per person on Part B and Part D combined. If you're married and both of you are on Medicare, that's nearly $2,000 a year for a single dollar of extra income. Here's the part almost nobody connects. Selling stock or doing a Roth conversion isn't an accident the government will forgive later. There's no appeal for a voluntary decision like a withdrawal or a conversion, only for involuntary income drops like retirement or losing a spouse. Once you've crossed the line, you've crossed it, full stop, for that year. In short, $1 over costs you the whole year at the higher rate. Quick gut check before Landmine 3. If you've ever heard the phrase required minimum distribution and felt your eyes glaze over, stay with me, because this is the one that quietly does the most damage over time. Landmine 3, required minimum distributions. Starting in your early 70s, the IRS stops letting you choose. You're forced to withdraw a minimum amount from tax-deferred accounts every year, whether you need the money or not, and it's taxed as ordinary income. Here's the part that catches people off guard. The required percentage is small at first, often well under 4%, but the account has usually kept growing the whole time you've been ignoring it, which means the dollar amount of the forced withdrawal often grows even though the percentage required barely moves. A retiree who let a $400,000 account ride untouched through their 60s can watch it grow into something considerably larger by the time withdrawals are forced, and now they're required to pull a bigger dollar amount on a bigger balance, taxed at whatever bracket that pushes them into, in the exact years their other income from Social Security is already at its highest. The bigger that account has grown, the bigger the forced withdrawal, and the easier it becomes to trigger both of the landmines we just covered all at once in the same year. In short, delay too long, and the IRS forces your hand when it hurts most. Notice the pattern here. None of these three landmines is really about the withdrawal itself. They're about how that withdrawal interacts with everything else happening in your financial life that year. That's the part a flat, evenly split withdrawal strategy completely ignores. So given all that, here's the order that tends to work best for most retirees with a mix of account types, and more importantly, here's why it works. Because the why matters more than the rule itself. Generally, spend from taxable accounts in cash first, in a controlled way. Use tax-deferred withdrawals or Roth conversions to deliberately fill up a low tax bracket, not avoid it entirely, fill it intentionally. Delay Social Security if you reasonably can. And protect the Roth account, let it run last, both for spending and for what it becomes for your heirs. Here's the mechanism underneath that rule. Every dollar you pull doesn't just get taxed at face value. It can also push other income into a different tax treatment. A dollar from a tax-deferred account can simultaneously do three things: get taxed as ordinary income, make more of your Social Security taxable, and inch you closer to an IRMAA threshold. A dollar from a Roth account does none of that. It's invisible to all three calculations. So the real question in any given year isn't, how much tax do I owe on this withdrawal? It's, how many other dominoes does this withdrawal knock over? If you're still with me, you're about to see why this actually matters in dollars, not theory. Let's make this real with a couple. We'll call them Mark and Diane, 63 and 61, recently retired. They want to spend $90,000 a year. They're planning to delay Social Security, Mark to 70. Diane to her full retirement age. So for the first several years, all their spending has to come from savings. Between them, they have $1.4 million, $500,000 in a taxable brokerage account, with about half of that being long-term gains. $700,000 combined in traditional IRAs and 401ks, and $200,000 in Roth accounts. Let's call these two paths Strategy A and Strategy B. Strategy A is what feels natural, pulling evenly from all three buckets every year. Strategy B is sequenced using the three-cost stack on every withdrawal. Here's what the numbers look like over 10 years. Starting balances: $500,000 taxable, $700,000 IRA, $200,000 Roth. Annual spending need $90,000, Strategy A, even withdrawals. Year 1 through 5, average taxable income around $42,000 annually. Average federal tax paid around $3,800 annually. Social Security taxable percentage in year 6 and beyond, 85%. IRMAA tier crossed in year 8 for both spouses. Roth balance remaining at year 10, $95,000. Tax-deferred balance at RMD age, $950,000. Total tax paid over 10 years, $52,000. Inheritance tax burden for heirs high. Strategy B sequenced, year 1 through 5. Average taxable income around $28,000 annually. Average federal tax paid around $1,200 annually. Social Security taxable percentage in year 6 and beyond, 50%. IRMAA tier crossed never. Roth balance remaining at year 10, $285,000. Tax-deferred balance at RMD age, $580,000. Total tax paid over 10 years, $28,000. Inheritance tax burden for heirs, low. Strategy A, pulling evenly. First, they generate ordinary income from the tax-deferred withdrawal every single year, some of which pushes into higher brackets as they age, and their tax-deferred balance keeps compounding. Second, they spend down their Roth, the one account that was supposed to be growing untouched the longest, the earliest, which means it has the least time to compound tax-free before they actually need it. Third, because their tax-deferred balance is still large and still growing when required withdrawals begin. Those forced withdrawals land in a higher bracket than they would have otherwise, and a larger share of their Social Security ends up taxed in the same years. Strategy B, sequenced. In their early 60s, before Social Security starts, they cover spending mostly from the taxable brokerage account, harvesting long-term gains that often land in that 0% bracket we talked about because their other income is so low. At the same time, they deliberately pull just enough from a traditional IRA or do a partial Roth conversion to fill up the lower tax brackets without spilling into the next one. They are not avoiding tax-deferred withdrawals. They're using this low income window to shrink that account on purpose on their terms instead of waiting for required withdrawals to force the issue later in much higher brackets. The Roth, meanwhile, sits untouched, compounding completely tax-free, growing into a larger pool of money that comes out with zero tax for them and later for whichever child inherits it. Not because Mark and Diane picked better investments under Strategy B, because every single dollar they pulled was tested against the three-cost stack before it left the account. Now let's talk about a few curveballs that can change the math entirely. 3 things worth knowing that almost never come up in this conversation. First, sequence of returns risk. Everything we've discussed has been about taxes, but there's a second risk layered on top. If markets drop right when you're supposed to sell from your taxable account, selling into a downturn locks in a loss at the worst possible time. This is why many retirees keep 1 to 2 years of spending in cash, specifically, not to optimize taxes, but to avoid being forced to sell anything, taxable or otherwise, during a bad market. Tax efficiency and market timing are 2 separate problems, and a good plan respects both. Second, qualified charitable distributions. If you're charitably inclined and facing required withdrawals you don't need for spending, you can direct that money straight from a tax-deferred account to a qualifying charity. It counts toward your required withdrawal, but it never shows up as taxable income. For the right person, this quietly diffuses 2 landmines at once. Third, if you retire before 65, there's a window most people don't see coming. Marketplace health insurance premium subsidies are also based on income, and a large withdrawal in those years can shrink or eliminate a subsidy you were counting on. The same low-income years that are great for Roth conversions can be the same years a health insurance subsidy is most sensitive to extra income. These 2 goals can actually compete with each other, and the right balance depends entirely on your specific numbers. Fourth, the widow's penalty, and this one rarely gets discussed at all. When one spouse passes away, the surviving spouse moves from filing jointly to filing as a single person, often the very next tax year. The income that once spread across 2 brackets now lands entirely in one. Every threshold we've covered tonight, the Social Security torpedo, the IRMAA cliff, the capital gains 0% band, gets roughly cut in half for that single filer, even though the account balances haven't changed at all. A withdrawal pattern that worked perfectly while both spouses were alive can suddenly push the surviving spouse into a much higher bracket the following year, at the exact moment they're also grieving and least equipped to deal with a tax surprise. This is one of the strongest reasons to think about Roth conversions earlier, while both spouses are alive and the brackets are wider, not after. Here's a second moment that should stop you. Since 2020, most adult children who inherit a traditional IRA from a parent no longer get to stretch withdrawals out over their own lifetime the way earlier generations could. Under current law, most non-spouse beneficiaries have to empty that inherited account within 10 years. If your child inherits a large traditional IRA, right in the middle of their own highest earning working years, every withdrawal they're forced to take stacks directly on top of their salary, often pushing them into a bracket far higher than the one you ever paid on that money. The account you spent decades protecting from tax can end up costing your kids more in tax in a shorter window than it ever cost you. That's not a reason to panic. It's a reason to ask whether some of that balance should become Roth money while you're still the one paying the bracket, not them. This is also the honest caveat to everything in this video. The general order, taxable, then controlled tax deferred, then Roth last, works for most people, most of the time. It is not a universal rule. Sometimes the math says to be more aggressive with conversions earlier, even into a higher bracket than feels comfortable, especially if your tax-deferred balance is enormous relative to everything else you own, or if a widow's penalty scenario is realistic for your household. The goal there is avoiding a much bigger forced withdrawal problem later. The strategy that wins on a spreadsheet should still let you sleep at night. If a plan technically saves you money but makes you anxious every time the market moves, that's worth weighing too. Here's a simple routine, once a year, with your tax return in front of you. 1. List your fixed income for the year ahead, Social Security, pension, any part-time income. 2. Decide honestly what you want to spend, including the trip, the gift, the home project, not just the bare minimum. 3. Subtract to find your gap. 4. Look at where your current tax bracket ends. 5. Fill that bracket intentionally with tax-deferred withdrawals or a Roth conversion. Take the rest of what you need from taxable assets, harvesting gains in that 0% band when you can. Only tap the Roth when something genuinely calls for it. 6. Recheck mid-year if something big happens, a property sale, an inheritance, a large medical bill. Any of those can change the answer. Before we close, here's one concrete step you can take in the next 7 days. Pull last year's tax return, find Form 1040, line 15. That's your taxable income line. Look at the tax table or bracket schedule you fell into. That number tells you how close you were to the next bracket. And it's step 1 in understanding whether you have room to fill this year. If you don't have the return handy, log into the IRS website or your tax software and download it. You can't plan the route if you don't know where you're starting. That's it. One line, one number. That's your starting point for everything we just discussed. Here's what I want you to walk away with. The order you withdraw from your accounts can matter more than which investments you hold inside them. 2 people can have the exact same balances and end up with wildly different lifetime tax bills, simply because one of them ran every withdrawal through the 3-cost stack, the direct tax, the bracket cost, and the compounding cost, and the other never knew there were 3 costs to begin with. This isn't personal tax advice. Your situation depends on your state, your filing status, your health, and how your specific accounts are structured. So walk through your own numbers with a tax professional or a fiduciary planner before making changes. But now you know the right questions to bring to that conversation. If this helped you see your own accounts differently, share it with someone who's heading into retirement soon. They'll thank you for it later. And if you want the 1-page breakdown of the 3-cost stack you can print and keep with your tax return, it's linked in the description below. Thanks for spending this time with me. You spent decades building this money. The order you spend it in is what decides how much of it is actually yours.